Hi, this is Anita for Arteza Art Supplies. Today I'm going to be doing a little watercolor painting of a sunrise, something like this. I'm going to be using Arteza's 140-pound watercolor paper, acid-free cold press paper. And one of the things I'm going to be demonstrating for you today is an easy way to do a gradated wash, sometimes called a graduated wash, which means that the color moves from one color to another very smoothly without any interference. It's a very useful technique and happens a lot when you're painting skies and other things in watercolor that have to have that smooth look. One of the things that's interesting to realize about painting water like oceans is that it's a reflection, and reflections always come straight down. So the reflection from the sun and also the reflection from the sky are mirror images of each other. If the sky goes from blue to yellow, the water will go from yellow to blue. But it will go without as much contrast because when the light hits the ocean and bounces back, it's already lost a little bit of energy. So it's not going to be as bright as the sky. A lot of people think of the sun as yellow, but actually if you're trying to look at it, it's the brightest thing you're looking at. It's like a white light in the sky. So one way to come up with that effect is to just leave the white paper, and that will give you this beautiful incandescent look that the sun has in this picture. So let's get started. I'm going to use this roll of masking tape to prop up my paper a little bit, because a little bit of a slant is helpful when you're doing a wash like that. Also, I've taken a piece of the paper and sealed it all around with artist's white masking tape, which is just the right stickiness and doesn't create any interference from being another color like painter's tape, blue painter's tape might do. This will keep the paint from crawling under the paper and making it buckle. The whole point of this is to keep it from buckling. Watercolor paper expands when it's wet and shrinks when it's dry, so those buckles that you sometimes see when you're painting will straighten out if your paper is secured down. And this is a fast way to do it, especially when you're doing a little sketch or something like this, which was actually a sketch for a larger painting. Now, one thing about this painting which you'll notice is that the sky is blue and yellow, but you don't see any green in there. That's interesting because we've learned that blue and yellow make green, so how did that happen? Well, the one way that you can get it to happen, one way you can get it to happen, is to not mix them, to let them both blend into a clear area of water so that they're separated by the clear water and they both retain their integrity. So that's what's happening in this picture right here. I'm going to start by drawing the horizon line. And people who study art know that it's never a good idea to draw a horizon that's equal top and bottom. I shouldn't say never, but it's generally a good idea to do something that has as much variety as you can. So I'm going to split mine down like this so that the top is obviously larger than the bottom. And another thing that happens with oceans is that at the horizon line, the water is very dark, and then it tends to get lighter as it comes toward you. This very dark color out here is something that is usually an ultramarine kind of color, at least in a tropical climate. And then it gets to be a little more blue-green as it comes forward. At a time like sunrise, the water is actually reflecting the sky, so the water could be yellow or pink, but it will always have those dark areas going through it. So I'm going to paint this by wetting the paper and then putting the paint in it and letting it kind of drift down, part blue to here, then just the clear water, and then the yellow from the other side, and that way I won't get green in the middle. I'm going to mix my paint up first because if I were to wet the paper first and then mix up the paint, the paper might dry out. in the middle of what I was doing. And this is something to be aware of, especially if you're painting out of doors. Paint dries differently depending on the conditions of the atmosphere. It might be affected by heat, wind, all those things that you don't have any control over, moisture in the air. So when you're getting ready to do a wash, have your paint mixed up, and then you're ready to go. It also might be a good idea to use 2 different brushes for 2 different colors that are wildly different, like blue and yellow, and maybe 2 different water containers to rinse those brushes out in, which I have over here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by mixing up a nice color that's not greenish blue, but more on the purplish side. So here we have that color. Remember, watercolor tends to dry light. So if your paper's already got a lot of water on it, it's going to dry even lighter. So there's my first color right there. Mix up a little more than you think you're going to need, because you don't want to stop in the middle and have to mix up a color. That's definitely not what you want to do. And then here I have a nice yellow. This yellow is a little bright for what I want, so I'm going to modulate it by putting some orange into it, give it a little bit of a warmth, maybe even a little yellow ochre, to just get it off of that primary yellow look. I just don't want it to look so contrasty. These are almost 2 primary colors, and it's not really necessary. And then over here I might put a little bit of pink in case I want to go in that route. Okay, so now take a brush that is sizable, that you can get up a lot of paint with, and paint your landscape here. Paint the top of it. Move quickly if you can, and try to catch each stroke under the previous stroke so that they overlap. And watch for areas where the paint might not be sticking so well, because sometimes while you're setting up your paper, you could get a little bit of your grease from your fingerprint on it. And sometimes you can work that in by just going over it a couple of times. Now, remember what I said about reflection. So if you like, you can paint the whole thing at one time, because that way you're getting a lot done at once. But it's a little harder to do it that way. You can stop in the middle right here and then do the bottom. I'm going to see how this works. So here I go with my blue color. It will be darker at the top. Remember, it's going to dry lighter, overlapping each stroke. By tilting it a little bit, I'm getting the strokes to run together. Now I have this area here, which is clear, but I'm going to have blue down here too, so I'm going to put the blue on that as well while I have it on my brush. It's giving a nice soft look. I see I missed a piece right there. So one thing you don't want to do is go back into it when it starts to dry, because if you do that, you'll get what's called a blossom. Some people call it a cauliflower. It's not what you really want. I'm going to take the yellow now and put that in here, which is going to be around where the sun is, and also right underneath where it is in the water. And maybe at this point, I'll lift out some of that color where the sun actually goes, because as long as the paint is in suspension, you should be able to get it out. And there it is. Okay. So you can see how that isn't really green, it's yellow and blue. Now there's a spot over here where it looks like I touched it with my fingerprint. So I'm going to see if it's possible for me to smooth that out. If it isn't possible, you'll see a blossom and you'll learn from that. Sometimes around the tape it will build up water and the water will push back out and make a blossom, so I'm going to go in there and get some of that out. By drying off my brush, I just pull the water off my brush and I go in there and I get it out. And if there are little pieces of whatever from erasing or from the paper, you can also kind of lift that out like a wick. Just kind of get it out like that. Okay. It's a fun thing to go down to the ocean or wherever you like to go every day for a period of time and do a series of paintings of the same thing. That can be really a good experience because you gain so much confidence from the fact that you've already been over that territory, and it's easy to do something with it. Okay, so now this would be an underpainting. I'm looking at it now to see how it's drying. Let's take a look at the original art, the original sketch again, and see where we're going with this. So we have a couple of different clouds here. There's several layers here. We have the pink that goes around the yellow here, and we have the gray that goes over the pink. The reason this being gray is that it's backlit from the sun. But there is a little bit of warmth picking up from the rays of the sun, so you can put that in there to break it up. A nice way to make a gray cloud is to mix that same blue with something like a warm brown or a dark earthy brown, something like burnt sienna or something like light red. Those two colors together make a very nice gray, surprisingly enough, but they do. So you can make some nice clouds out of that. You can lightly touch your painting and see if it's cool. If it's cool, that means it's not dry because the water is still evaporating. So you can run your finger over it. And if you're going to test it to see if it's dry, you can test it in a corner where it doesn't really matter. And it looks like that's pretty dry. So I'm going to take this gray that I mixed up and try doing some clouds up here, see what happens. Now you can see from the hardness of the edge of this that it is indeed dry. If it weren't dry, it would have a soft edge like all this has. So I'm going to make some cloud shapes by using the side of my brush and just kind of, again, creating some kind of variety. Clouds tend to be a little bit flat on the bottom, so I'm making shapes like that, and if I want to make them a little bit less distinct, I can soften the edge of it like that. Give them a wispy look. If I want them to look a little darker, I can drop some more color into it like that. Maybe I'll put a smaller one over here. And in this time of day, a lot of time there's a little bit of a wind, so you may want to put a few streaks on them to indicate that it's moving. Make them different sizes and different looking shapes. Because this is picking up some warmth from the bottom here where the sun is, you may want to put a little bit of that in there. While it's still wet, you can just drop it in and it will have that look, that it's being kissed by the sun. Now, I think you saw right there that the water just ran out. When you pick your brush up, it will blob, and so you have to be aware of when you're taking your brush off the paper. Like right now, if I took it off, the paint would blob out. So I have to be ready to pick that up and move it around if I don't want to have a big red area there. If I want it to not look quite that obvious. I'm putting some more of it in over here. Moving that around. Okay, so looking at this, we can see that around the sun, I left the sun pretty much out. I'm going to be putting some warm colors around that sun, leaving the white out to make it look like it's glowing. This doesn't have to be a hard edge. This can be a soft edge, actually. But let's start with this. That would be a hard edge right there. You can see where it starts and you can see where it ends. As I paint out from that, looks like there's a little piece of something there. Now I'm going to start to soften it, very much like I did the sky. I'm going to leave a little area of clear water and put the red next to it so that I can blend them together. So here's the pink or the red right here. If I don't want that little spot there, I can still pick it up. These little spots want to happen. And then after that, I get that down there. I can sort of wash out my brush and sort of blend these together. And I'll get that beautiful soft look, but the sun disk, which is after all a star and has a shape, will remain lit up like that. So I can move my brush around on that and create some areas of color, more or less distinct, that sort of look like clouds and that are reflected in the clouds up there. So before I go ahead and paint the ocean, I might want to take some of those same colors and put some streaks in the ocean where they have some relationship to what's reflected. So right there, there is some pink in the ocean. So I'm putting it in. And here, some yellow. Reflections always come straight down. That's what they do. So the sun reflection will actually come straight down like that. Now, I'm not saying that you need to draw it in. You can if you want, but you should think about it, how that's going to be happening. Because it's not coming like this. It doesn't get wider like perspective. It has nothing to do with perspective. It just always comes straight down. So you may want to do that. Also, if you think that the ocean down here isn't dark enough and you want to put a little more blue in it, this would be a good time to do that. You can put a few more blue streaks in it. Now, this reflection is going over some waves, so it's not like a stripe. It has things happening over it. In other words, these light areas here will be left out. These won't the same way, but you can put some marks, and as they get further away from you, they become less obvious and less distinct. So that's what we're looking at right there. You can see how that nice watercolor effect is happening here, where the red is starting to blend into the yellow and create some effects. If you like that kind of thing, you can go back in there and put in some more color. And this would be a good time to tilt your paper so that it would run down and you can have better control over it. This may be going to create some blossoms in there, but in a cloud, a blossom is a desirable thing. So, in fact, just to show you what could happen, I'm going to drop a little water in there, and you'll see what could happen if you introduce water into an area that's almost dry already. So that's what we're looking at there. Now, down here, there's an optical illusion. When the sun gets near the horizon like that, it flattens out. So I'm going to be making this area red. I do have to wait, though, until this dries. So in a minute or two, I'll be able to come back and do that. All right, so before we start in on this again, I want to talk a little bit about clouds. A lot of times people don't realize when they're looking at clouds that they're actually in perspective. So if this is your horizon, and this is your vanishing point here, if there's a cloud here, say that's your cloud, That's your cloud. As they get away from you, they get smaller because they are receding. So they get smaller and closer together. So that's just something to think about. You don't have to make them look exactly like that, but you might want to have some small clouds here and then some bigger clouds up there. Just something to think about. Okay. So back to our original painting. I want to paint the ocean now. I want to start with this very dark blue line and make that be the basis of where the horizon starts. So I'm going to do that, and then after I do that, I will paint some of the other clouds in the sky while that's drying. So I'm going to take my paint, my blue paint. This is ultramarine. Probably gets its name from this very thing, that it's the farthest out of the ocean. And I'm going to put it up here and here. Which pretty much hides any imperfections that were on the horizon line at that time. Now in this painting, there's a little bit of a glow on the ocean, so I'm going to take the red and outline that and then blend it into the blue. So here's the red, like that. And like I had done the sun before, I'll put a little bit of extra around it, like that. It flattens out a little bit. It's kind of interesting how that happens. And then what I'll do is blend it in to the blue, like that. But I only want a little tiny bit of that red because where the sun is a reflection. So I don't want that to be filled in. So it's just kind of tinging the blue where it was. You can sort of see that. And I can put a few lines over that to help understand that that's where the lines of the ocean are going to be. I want this blue line to be very deep, so I'm going to actually go over it twice. While it's drying, I'm going to go back into the clouds and make them a little darker and put the bird in. You can mix a very nice gray by mixing blue with an orangey brown color. That's what I have here. So I'm going to put some clouds in that are a little closer, a little darker, like that. And again, I'm going to tinge them with that red color on the bottom to show that they're picking up some warmth from the sun. If it's too much red, I can take some of it out. And here are the smaller clouds going into the distance. As it gets down to the horizon line, they would get warmer. They'd be a warmer gray. So that's what I'm going to put right here. And I'm going to put my bird in now because it's dry up here. This might not be a bad time to use a watercolor pencil to put the bird in. I'm just putting in one bird, so I'm going to draw it in. And if I want it to look more painted, I can just go over it and fill that in. So it has a more painterly look. Take away some of that so it doesn't fight with it. Okay, so now I'm going to finish off the ocean and finish off this painting by getting back into that deep ultramarine and doing some of this slashy brush stroke. This would also be a good opportunity for the watercolor pencils. So I'm going to do it first in paint and then in pencils, and you'll see that I'm going to be putting down quite a bit of blue, and over the area where the reflection is, there will be less, so that it'll look like the sun is shining on that particular area.
Slide it up a little bit.
Okay. Now this is glazing, where you go over an area that was already painted with another area of color. Again, I'm not getting green because I'm painting over it, but I'm not mixing it. This is a very important thing to understand, the difference between mixing and glazing. When you're mixing a color, you're actually sort of changing the chemistry of it, but when you're overlaying it, the two colors are retaining a lot of their integrity. So it can be a nice way to get a glow. In this case, the yellow is glowing through the water, but the water still looks blue. I want the reflection from the sun to be pretty much the brightest part of this ocean, so I don't want to have competing areas around it that are almost as bright. Okay, so now I'm going to go over it with some slashy dark brush stroke and then some crayons. I think before I do that, watercolor pencils, I'm going to take out some of this because it's fighting with the bird shape and I don't want that. Okay, so here we go. It's almost like abstract painting. And this is what it looks like when the ocean is very calm. Other times there would be waves or currents, but on this particular day, it was pretty calm, and it just looked great. Reflections as straight down as you can make it. And then with the watercolor pencil, I'm looking for this one. think I'll put a little bit more red right in there, and that'll be it. A bit more red right there, and maybe a few really dark strokes. And there you have a beautiful oceanscape. Okay, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon.